In this interconnected clusterfuck of a culture, there is no way to be authentic and dodge doing any damage. The universe is a perfect mess, and hurting others and being hurt are both inevitabilities of nature. Millions to billions of specific events had to happen exactly as they did for me to be sitting here. Right here, right now, is the only time and place where this assortment of memories and flesh, what I call I, could possibly exist. I have been trying to live up to a standard I cannot maintain. Commitment isn't always noble. I would say there's a fine line between commitment and stubbornness, but functionally there isn't one. All these times I was acting against myself to be the bigger person was just as arrogant as it was unhealthy. I couldn't close the gap between the kind of person I would be proud to be and the person I felt capable of being. Trauma is a wound, just like a physical wound. It doesn't go away by pretending it isn't there or ignoring when it hurts. All wounds are valid, and it behooves us to respect them as realities of our human meat sock. On one hand, I've known for a while that trauma healing is a complex network of highways that have different pit stops. And whether or not a person finds a concept healing or toxic totally depends on where they're at that time on that particular issue. And providing that person a safe space necessitates being respectful of that. We might know all the facts and statistics. We might have rock-solid, well-thought-out arguments about things like power differentials and thought distortions and feel so fucking righteous. And who knows? We might even really be the good guys. But you know what? Everybody feels that way. Everybody. The point is, there is no definitive line between when it's their responsibility and when it's ours. Autistic burnout is a natural response to overexerting ourselves trying to meet the expectations of the neurotypical world. The biggest mistakes I ever made throughout my life stemmed from believing that I was more pliable than my goals were. I respected my goals more than I respected myself because I didn't perceive a self to respect. I never even gave myself a seat at the table. So nothing I thought I wanted could have possibly come from me. I wasn't there. The person I was before was a fabrication that I was constantly trying to refine to accomplish tasks assigned to me by other people based on what would benefit them. I was well trained over many years to obey and affirm a social system that was perpetuating itself at my expense. So now I reject the cultural narrative that changing yourself to accommodate a goal is noble, while changing your goal to accommodate you is somehow worthy of judgment or ridicule. So all of this is why I get on the internet and talk about neurodivergence, trauma healing, and self-awareness, acceptance, and advocacy. Because I think it's scary as hell that society normalizes withholding people from being what they are. As long as we spend so much time on our phones and these apps are optimized to get us to spend even more, the content we consume there is the content of our lives. Our attention is our lives. And we're handing it over to profit-driven enterprises, so nothing is stopping them from telling us what to want. I'm not going to claim it's possible to completely untangle ourselves from all external circumstances that inform what we want, but it is possible to remember we are us before we're them. Generally speaking, aggressive people are wounded. People who lose their shit over things that seem trivial are most likely having a trauma response. Whenever someone blows up over something trivial, the focus is always on the failure of that person to grasp the triviality. Why would someone get this worked up over something as silly as whatever? It's never on how excruciatingly painful it must be to live day after day at risk of being catapulted from your sanity into a whirlwind of fear and rage just because of some trivial shit. I think for a lot of people, compassion for aggression implies an agreement to endure it, or approval of it. But it doesn't. It is possible to think someone's behavior is repulsive and to want nowhere near it without exacerbating their suffering. But outward aggression is not the only thing that can spark a conflict. The world is a lush cornucopia of trauma and triggers. Everyone sees their own ensemble of ghosts in the haunted houses of life. And when someone gets triggered, something actually happened that actually hit their brain at an angle that conjured up actual trauma, even if it didn't affect everyone else the same way. It may not be a shared experience, but it is their experience, and there's no such thing as an invalid experience. The point is, we don't know shit about what that person has going on. We're missing too much context to tell the story. Our experience of their bullshit will teach us far more about ourselves than it ever could about them. The second assumption is that these bursts of aggression can be controlled. And if a person is acting aggressively, they're choosing not to take that control at the expense of others. And yeah, Their temper is their responsibility, but they quite literally can't decide in the moment to turn their anger off. When we're triggered or enraged, we have limited access to the part of our brain, that would be the frontal lobe or prefrontal cortex, that manages our self-control. So for people with aggressive trauma responses, to stop flipping out, they would have to work on that before they get triggered in the first place. Angry, triggered people can't make the rational decisions that we judge them so harshly for not making, any more than a stabbing victim can stop bleeding on command. Psychological trauma impacts the brain just like physical trauma does. Sticks and stones may break our bones, but words can break our minds. And the sticks and stones that broke our bones can also break our minds. And the cast for a broken mind is safety, support, and compassion. But that doesn't mean we lose moral points if we can't provide someone safety. A volcano doesn't have access to its prefrontal cortex either. Its eruptions aren't its fault. But we're not assholes if we don't want to live next to one. There's a huge difference between not accommodating a difficult person and believing they don't deserve accommodation at all. And the traumatized people who feel morally compelled to support other traumatized people in particular really need to internalize this idea. It's possible to accept that we can't handle an aggressor without treating them like no one can handle them. Facing the reality that we can't deal with all the people may hurt our egos, but receiving repetitive messaging that we don't deserve compassion hurts our souls. And we are all more likely to move forward together if we respect ourselves and each other as we are. There's an inevitable autism to gaslighting trauma pipeline because we have fierce aversions to discomforts that feel very minor to holistic and neurotypical people, and our reactions to certain stimuli strike them as being out of proportion. We need more time to process information, and we often need it presented in a particular way for it to make sense to us. Otherwise, we're confused. That confusion is emotionally dysregulating, and the outward presentation of that dysregulation is harshly judged. We learn that our experiences won't be taken seriously, our needs will not be met, and we won't be socially accepted unless our experience is shared by others. First, we have to face the unmet need underneath it all: loneliness. We feel like our subjective internal reality does not matter to anyone but ourselves because it never has, and we resent that. And while we should all strive to validate our own reality, humanity is a social species, so self-validation will never relieve the suffering of feeling alone. So to heal properly, we need true friends who will believe us when we explain our subjective experiences. And we need to do the same for them. If we want to stop playing this tired, zero-sum game, we have to stop making it one. We will encounter people who experience situations differently than us for the rest of our lives. And whether or not we make enemies of all of them is up to us. Sometimes we have to clean messes other people made in our lives even if it's not fair. Let's say we live in one house for the rest of our lives. This house is our life, and someone spilled milk all over the floor. This spill is our trauma. And let's say whoever spilled it fucked off. Maybe they died. Maybe they just moved away. Maybe they just keep refusing to do it. The point is, they are not gonna clean it, and there's nothing we can do to make them. And now, let's say guests in our house slip on the spilled milk sometimes and get hurt. They accidentally trigger us, and we yell at them, or give them the silent treatment, or neglect their needs. Some of us warn people about the spill ahead of time. We might tell new friends or new partners, hey, FYI, I've got trauma, there's this spill on the floor, so if you don't think you can handle that, you might not want to come in my house. We'll tell them what situations we don't handle well so they know what to expect. They may learn to tiptoe around the spill for a while, what not to say, what not to do. But if we never put any effort into cleaning it, they may have to leave because they've hit their limit of how much they're willing to tolerate from a person without the capacity to meet their needs. If we're genuinely not ready, or we don't have the spoons to do that work, that's valid, but it's just as valid for other people who can't put up with it. The toxic folks among us don't acknowledge there's a mess at all until our guest slips in it. We'll flip out on them, seemingly out of nowhere, and catch them totally off guard. And we're so hell-bent on not cleaning it, we expect and often demand that they do. It's not even about holding the culprit responsible anymore, we just feel entitled to be spared the work. And anyone who would expect us to do it can't possibly really care about us, because that must mean they don't get it's not our fault. Here's the tragic irony. If we show people we have the humility and bravery to clean the milk, that's when they start helping. Letting them decide for themselves is the loving thing to do and makes them feel safer to love us back. Putting our healing and happiness in the hands of the people who have proven they don't care about us is just plain irrational. We're responsible for our trauma healing, we're accountable for our trauma responses, but we are not at fault for the trauma itself. As autistic people, there comes a point in time that we have to accept we are responsible for things we don't have complete control over. When we hurt someone's feelings, intention matters. To us. As autistic people, we have been punished mercilessly for crimes we had no idea we were committing. So it's natural for us to feel like it's totally unfair to be held accountable for harm we couldn't have possibly predicted. From our perspective, we stepped on an invisible landmine. So if someone thinks we should have seen it, they're clearly not grasping our point of view, so why should we grasp theirs? Nonetheless, it is vital to our healing and our sanity that we hold ourselves accountable for harm whether we intended it or not. So let's unpack why autistic people might not sit comfortably with the idea of unintended harm. We struggle with cognitive empathy, so if we don't think it makes sense for the other person to be upset, we're less likely to feel bad for them, especially if we're the ones they're upset with. If we think it's us versus them, we're absolutely going to choose us if they can't rationally convince us otherwise. Most of the time, when we feel like we're being asked to do more work, what we actually need to do is different work. Put a useless bag down, and then pick a useful bag up. And in these types of conflicts, what we need is a different mental model of the situation. Instead of thinking of it as admitting fault, think of it as acknowledging harm. Yes, we didn't know better. We couldn't have been expected to know better. We did the best we knew how to do. But we recognize and care that someone got hurt, and we wish that hadn't happened. If we don't apologize for unintended harm, the harmed party learns we care more about being right than we do about their pain. Just because someone hurt us by accident doesn't mean they aren't accountable for the harm they did. So there's no need to pin malicious intent on them to validate our hurt feelings. And once we realize we can hold those people accountable, it naturally follows that we can be held accountable for our unintended harm as well. And by taking that accountability, we also take a powerful step forward in strengthening our current relationships and opening our hearts to new ones. Many of us embrace neurodivergence because it means we haven't just been failing at being people. And we react more negatively when people suggest we have trauma or a personality disorder. There appears to be an underlying belief that our needs are only valid if they're justified by the right diagnosis, whether by a professional or by ourselves. Neurotype versus trauma is an offshoot of another problematic binary, nature versus nurture, a neurotype being nature and trauma being nurture. If it's neurodivergence, we often believe we're not broken, and it's not our burden to fix ourselves, it's society's responsibility to accommodate us because we can only be seen as flawed if we're held to its standards. If it's trauma, we often think that something broke us, that can and should be fixed. We can't base how valid our needs are based on these diagnoses because they're not even fully understood. The experiences and behaviors we associate with diagnoses are real, but the diagnoses are not. They're more like genres. They're circles that fallible humans drew around a set of traits, and they change shape every day. Even if our neurodivergence is assessed by an educated professional, that professional is making an educated guess based on these circles. The truth is a big, blurry mess of genes, environment, and trauma crashing into each other. PTSD can be considered neurodivergence. Genetics can traumatize people, and trauma can impact our genes. It's reasonable and our right to decide for ourselves the best way to frame our divergence and care for ourselves accordingly. And in turn, to respect that right in other neurodivergent people with similar experiences to choose a different route to self-care. We decide what we want out of life, what aspects of our divergence are in our way, and whether or not a situation calls for being flexible about our needs. We are the only ones with all the relevant data, so it's both our right and our responsibility. It makes sense to defend or fight for our diagnosis if it's needed to acquire limited resources, like medication, therapy, or certain work accommodations. So if someone needs your diagnosis to provide those resources, that's valid. But if they won't respect your needs without a permission slip, just because they find them disruptive or inconvenient, f*** them. They can cry about it. Our need for explanations in order to understand is valid. But inconveniently, it's also valid for someone to say no to explaining. For an autistic person, being held to boundaries we can't wrap our heads around is confusing and dysregulating. It feels awful. So if they don't explain, we can feel like they're harming us. This is partly because of the nature of the autistic brain, but also because of the trauma of growing up having our needs constantly gaslit. Our gaslighting trauma and our struggles with confusion with undefined things aren't anyone else's problem unless they choose to make it so. Regardless, if we're insisting they give an explanation that they don't want to give, we are violating their boundary. It's never okay to violate someone's boundary, regardless of our opinion of it, because we have no say in what another person says, does, or cares about. We can't make them explain, but we can maintain we won't understand until they do. It's a simple switch. Scratch out, "I demand that you explain," and replace it with, "I'm not going to understand if you don't explain." By doing this, our boundary violation will transform into a boundary. This perspective switch requires we accept that we won't always get our explanation, and demanding it won't help. Not because they're willfully withholding it, but also because they may not even know what it is. A lot of the time, the reason they blame us for our demand is because of the pressure we're putting on them to form words and sentences that they can't form. And they don't have to. If they say no, no means no. Boundaries need no justification. It is not acceptable nor wise to expect total control of another human being. The goal is to limit the impact their harmful choices have on us. Boundaries are sacred. Ours and theirs. Whatever someone says they want, need, or are is a fact. Changing another person is never an option. So, if our need for an explanation is a boundary, their need to not explain is also a boundary, and boundaries are sacred, then how do we navigate that? Step 1 would be to take some time and assess how important this relationship is to us, and how likely the other person is to work with us. And if they aren't likely to work with us, I repeat, assess how important this relationship is to you. Labeling someone with these terms can be harmful because it triggers emotional distress that interferes with recognizing and addressing behavior. An example of aforementioned harm is the emergence of this baseless dichotomy between narcissism and autism, because it is entirely possible to have both. Despite all the ego-stroking narratives to the contrary, there's a pretty clear pipeline. Dismissing all suggestions of overlap between the two as ableism or toxicity cuts us off from awareness that may be pivotal to our growth and healing. Many of us, myself included, have not only been treated like we're narcissists, but we've also experienced the horror of recognizing the symptoms of narcissistic personality disorder in ourselves. After all, we might also struggle to receive someone else's subjective experience, have exaggerated fears of being rejected or mocked, view minor disagreements as potential dangers, lean into all-or-nothing thinking, have a hard time working in a group, tend to bring the topic of conversation back to our own interests, and most chillingly, experience perfectionism and a need for control. Behavior associated with narcissism, including manipulative behavior, can be a trauma response to growing up in an holistic world with autism. I'm operating from the Cambridge Dictionary definition: controlling someone or something to your own advantage, often unfairly or dishonestly. I am not going to deny that being dishonest causes extreme psychological distress in the autistic mind. However, if we have to survive, we cope with that distress by lying to ourselves. Masking is presenting ourselves inauthentically in order to take control of the way others respond to us, unfairly taking away their right to make their own decisions about how to respond to who we actually are. There are certain traumatized autistic people who have learned that the only way to protect their safety is to play a zero-sum game with their needs and the needs of others. They have learned if they respect other people's boundaries, they will be harmed. Trauma, across all neurotypes, often stems from emotional neglect in our youth. We can think of this as love starvation. And because humanity is a social species, love is a basic need. And if our basic needs were neglected, it can evoke a strong sense that we now deserve better treatment. It can also ignite a belief that we are owed. This can collide in dangerous ways with some realities of the autistic brain. We have a strong sense of justice and fairness and a very literal, rigid, and rule-bound way of thinking. So if we feel adamantly that we are owed, we may feel it with uncompromising inflexibility. So our trauma may compel us to take control of situations even when it's morally questionable to do so. And our monotropic attention tunnel may make us unable to grasp the morality involved entirely. Some may now be wondering how our excessively intense experience of empathy could possibly make room for the cruel and uncaring attitude associated with narcissism. If we feel like our overwhelming empathy interferes with the control we need to feel safe, our minds will protect us by shutting that system down. For instance, many holistic people don't think we have empathy unless we confess to their shitty bullshit interpretations of things we do. Such people expect us to admit that we don't care, that we acted selfishly, etc. So we learn empathy requires allowing people to be awful to us. So it becomes the enemy of our safety. If we don't feel like we have the control over our lives that we need to function, our life experiences have taught us that others cannot be trusted to respect our needs by their own volition, our monotropic attention tunnel interferes with our perception of boundaries, and our rigidity and strong sense of justice leave us uncompromising about the belief that we are owed, then it follows that our minds might rationalize treating other people with entitled, narcissistic behavior. If an autistic person exhibits an autistic flavor of narcissism, that's not a reflection of autism. It's a reflection of autism under certain conditions. If we want to check ourselves for legit narcissism, we can begin by observing our own motives. For instance, if we're redirecting a conversation to ourselves, why are we doing that? Do we think we're more interesting than the other person? Do we want them to think so too? If so, maybe narcissism. On the other hand, we may be trying to relate to their experience through sharing a relevant personal story or perspective, a very autistic thing to do. Or if we're struggling to work in a team, is it because we have no interest in taking in other people's ideas? Do we think ours are superior and the only reason the others reject them is because they're idiots? Are we steamrolling over the others because we feel entitled to do so? That could be narcissistic. But not if we're just having difficulty comprehending the overwhelming cacophony of everyone's varying contributions. If we want to live in a world where we are heard, it rationally follows that we would prioritize making others feel heard. The world is a collaborative project. But the narcissistic perspective doesn't see other people as collaborators, it sees them as competition. We believe we are on our own and we are owed. That is what narcissism looks like. That said, it takes our own introspection and self-awareness to unpack this stuff. So if someone accuses us of being narcissistic, we have to be careful how much we take that seriously. We shouldn't let anyone with a flimsy understanding of autism who won't listen to our side have influence over our image of ourselves. We are all accountable for the consequences of engaging with others in a narcissistic manner, regardless of neurotype. In fact, clinging to an excuse to avoid accountability is textbook narcissistic behavior. If we truly want to counter the assumption that autistic people are inherently narcissistic, holding ourselves accountable is a sensible way to go about that. If we want to reduce the amount of abuse, hate, and trauma in this world, we have to let the pieces that live inside us die there. And somehow we're going to have to find a way to accept that narcissistic people are valid members of our fucked up human family. And they're going to treat people however they decide to treat people, and there ain't a damn thing in the world we can do about it. What we can do is decide how we're going to treat people and how we're going to allow people to treat us. The intense desire to vilify and exile narcissistic people comes from a place of feeling we're powerless against them if we don't. And without solid boundaries, we are. Boundaries are a profoundly cognitively challenging concept for many autistic people. We aren't likely to intuitively form them because we socialize manually. We need our boundaries to be firm, tangible, and consciously defined for them to exist at all. That is the pursuit that is worthy of our attention right now. I made a video about Caleb talking about how he exemplifies autism in Big Mouth seasons 1 through 6. So this isn't a matter of Matthew needs to drop everything that he's doing and rearrange his personal priorities in order to accommodate the autistic boy. No. What he needs to do and does is recognize and acknowledge the emotional impact that he had on Caleb, recognize its validity, and meet him in the middle. Make sure both their needs are met.
You know, Caleb, I don't know if we've ever hugged each other.
I don't like to be touched, but I'll allow it today.
This was another one of those weird being seen moments, is that I will allow it. Like, that's something that I've said as an inside joke with myself that, like, people don't know I'm joking when I say it, and it's weird, but whenever somebody asks me for permission in a situation where I feel like it's, like, weird to, like, need permission, the most common example leaping to mind is, can I use your bathroom? Like, can you imagine if I said no? So if somebody's in my apartment and they say, can I use your bathroom? I go, I will allow it. Like, I am such a benevolent ruler of this apartment that I'm kind enough to allow you the honor of using my labeled bathroom. So now let's move on to the episode that everybody's dying to hear me talk about. Panic at the Mall. We will need to process and arrange the facts of the situation into the tunnel to function, regardless of how anxious we are. The least anxious autistic people that I know are just really good at arranging shit in their tunnels. If their backpack broke, then they have a plan of what they would do in that situation. And the best plans have contingencies in place for the unexpected, because we don't live in an orderly black and white world. And the fact that Matthew is now showing that he understands that and he's willing to work with Caleb about how to get his needs met, that's going to increase that trust. My closest allistic friends, I can trust that if I'm in a situation with them where random things might happen, that they're going to be able to pick up where I leave off, and that if I have a really intense reaction to something, that they're going to respect that reaction and not invalidate it. If someone suggests that you may be disabled, that you may have a disability, that in a vacuum, if there's not other shame and yucky context attached to it, just that on its own, not ableist. Now, if somebody does suggest that you might be disabled or have a disability in a vacuum with no other toxic context, and you take that as an insult, that's where the ableism is at. That is called internalized ableism. If you just think the idea of being disabled is inherently shameful, bam. When I say that autistic justice seeking originates from a place of disability, that is not an insult or a shaming concept. Something that tends to happen with a lot of disabilities is because you have a deficit in some area, you have to kind of compensate for that in some other area. And the autistic brain likes consistent schemas. We like games with consistent rules. We like franchises with consistent lore, and we do not like lies. Having strong integrity, having a strong, consistent sense of who we are, what we believe in, what our North Star is, it gives us a structure to follow that helps us regulate and navigate the world. You know, people have this idea that autistic people don't want to follow rules. What autistic people don't want to do is follow rules they don't understand and don't agree with. There is disability in this because it comes from disability in the areas of pivoting, slower, more involved decision-making processing, and tremendous struggles with just sitting with the gray. Social justice pursuits can give autistic people that comfy seat. An autistic person can get up in the morning and go, I know what I'm fucking doing today, and I know that it matters. And when you think about it, it makes perfect sense that a deficit in one area could be a strength in another depending on the context. The fact that autistic people struggle and have no tolerance for duplicity and lies and bullshit helps make the world a better place for everybody.